My mother's text arrived at 7:47 in the evening, 3 days before Christmas. I was sitting in my home office, a glass of wine untouched beside my laptop, when my phone lit up with her name. For a moment, I felt that old flutter of hope. Maybe she was calling to apologize. Maybe she'd realized how wrong it was to exclude me from another family gathering. Maybe, after 38 years, she was finally choosing me. I opened the message. "Don't come home for Christmas. Your sister is against you." I read it twice. Then a third time. 9 words. 9 words to summarize everything I'd ever meant to my family. But here's the thing. I didn't cry. I didn't call her back to plead my case. I didn't type an angry response or throw my phone across the room. I smiled, because my mother had just told me not to come to my house for Christmas, and she had absolutely no idea that the house she was banning me from had belonged to me for 3 years. I set down my phone and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside sat a folder I hadn't touched in months. Legal documents, property deeds, a purchase agreement dated 3 years ago, signed by a company called Carter Legacy Holdings, LLC, a company I owned entirely, a company that held the title to 247 Maple Street, the house my father built, the house my mother and sister had been living in rent-free while treating me like a ghost. My mother thought she was closing a door. She didn't realize she'd just handed me the key. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 38 years old, a financial consultant living in downtown Boston. I have a corner office, a retirement account most people would envy, and an apartment so organized it looks like a magazine spread. I built all of this myself. Scholarships, night classes, 12-hour workdays, years of saying no to vacations and luxuries while my sister Laura spent money like it grew on trees. I learned early that no one was coming to save me, so I saved myself. My family never noticed. That was the point, I suppose. I was the invisible daughter, the one who didn't need attention, the one who could be counted on to show up early, help clean up, and never complain when her name was forgotten in the gratitude speeches. Laura was different. Laura was the golden child, the one my mother protected and praised and prioritized. When we were growing up, Laura got the new car at 16. I got a bus pass and a reminder to be grateful for what I had. Laura's college was paid for in full. I worked 3 jobs and graduated with honors and debt. Laura's wedding had 200 guests and a 5-tier cake. I sat in the back row and no one asked why I wasn't a bridesmaid. I used to wonder what I'd done wrong. What flaw in my character made me so easy to overlook? But somewhere along the way, I stopped wondering. I stopped expecting my mother to show up for my graduations, my promotions, my life. I stopped inviting her to things because the disappointment of her absence hurt more than never asking at all. And then my father died 3 years ago, and everything changed. I looked at the text message again. "Your sister is against you. Not we decided or we need some space. No, your sister is against you." My mother couldn't even pretend this was her choice. She was hiding behind Laura the way she always had. Laura wanted me gone, so I was gone. That was the equation. That had always been the equation. But this time I had something Laura didn't know about, something none of them knew about. I picked up my phone and called Diana Walsh. Diana was my attorney, but over the past 3 years she'd become something closer to a friend. She answered on the second ring, even though it was almost 8 o'clock on a December evening. "Emily, I was wondering when you'd call." "You knew this was coming." Diana laughed softly. "I know your family. I figured Christmas would be the breaking point." "What happened?" I told her about the text. About my mother's words, about Laura's invisible hand pulling the strings, about the fact that they'd just told me not to come to a house I legally owned. Diana was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do you want to do?" "I want them to know. Not everything. Not yet. Just enough to shake the foundation." "I can have a formal notice drafted by morning. Certified mail or email?" "Email. I want to see how fast they panic." Diana asked if I was sure. I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. For 3 years, I'd been paying the mortgage on that house. For 3 years, I'd been covering the property taxes, the insurance, the repairs. For 3 years, I'd watched my mother and sister live in my father's legacy while treating me like I didn't exist. And I'd said nothing, because I was waiting for them to see me, waiting for them to change. But they weren't going to change. That text message proved it. My mother would always choose Laura. Laura would always see me as competition to be eliminated. And I would always be the daughter standing outside the door, waiting to be let in. Not anymore. I walked to my bookshelf and picked up the single-framed photo I kept there. My father, smiling, his arm around my shoulders at my college graduation. He'd driven 3 hours to be there. He'd sat in the front row. He'd taken me to dinner afterward and told me he was proud of me, that he'd always been proud of me, that he wished my mother could see what he saw. "She doesn't worry about you because you've never given her a reason to," he'd said that night. "That's not fair. I know it's not fair. But Emily, you're going to be okay. You're going to be more than okay. And one day, they'll see what I see." He died 2 years later, and I discovered that the house he'd built was 63 days from foreclosure because my mother had refinanced it 3 times to pay off Laura's credit card debt. So I bought it, quietly, through an LLC, before the bank could take it. I saved my father's house the way I'd saved myself, alone, without thanks, without recognition. Because that's what invisible daughters do. They protect things, they fix things, they hold families together while everyone else falls apart. But I was done being invisible. I was done being the safety net no one acknowledged. I was done waiting for a seat at a table that was never set for me. I opened my laptop and began composing an email. The subject line was simple. Regarding property at 247 Maple Street, formal notice. The body was brief. A notification of ownership, a request for a formal family meeting to discuss the property's future. A deadline of December 24th. I attached one document, the deed, with my name on it. My finger hovered over the send button for just a moment. Once I did this, there was no going back. My mother would panic. Laura would rage. The family I'd spent my whole life trying to belong to would finally have to see me, even if they only saw me as the enemy. I pressed send at exactly 9 o'clock. Then I finished my wine, turned off my phone, and went to bed. Let them lose sleep for once. I'd been losing sleep over them for 38 years. I didn't know it then, but that email would bring my mother to my door within 24 hours. And for the first time in my life, she would be the one asking to be let in. I woke up the next morning to 17 missed calls. 12 from my mother, 5 from Laura, and one voicemail that was nothing but my sister screaming into the phone. I lay in bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of Boston waking up outside my window. December 22nd, 3 days until Christmas. The day after I'd sent an email that would unravel everything my family thought they knew about me. I got up, made coffee, and did my morning yoga routine. The phone kept buzzing on the kitchen counter. I let it ring. For 38 years, I'd been the one waiting by the phone, hoping someone would call, hoping someone would remember I existed. Let them wait for once. I didn't listen to Laura's voicemail. I already knew what she sounded like when she was angry. High-pitched and breathless, words tumbling over each other, accusations flying like shrapnel. She'd been perfecting that voice since we were children, weaponizing her emotions to get what she wanted. It worked on our mother every single time. It had never worked on me. By noon, the calls had stopped. That's when I knew something else was coming. Laura never gave up that easily. She just changed tactics. I sat at my desk, pretending to work on a client's estate plan, but my mind kept drifting. The silence from my phone felt heavier than the ringing had. I found myself staring out the window at the Boston skyline, thinking about how I'd ended up here. Not geographically, emotionally. How I'd become a woman who could send a legal notice to her own family and sleep soundly afterward. The answer was simple. I'd been trained for this my whole life. I was 10 years old the first time I understood that I was different from Laura. Not better or worse, just different in a way that mattered to my mother. I came home from school one afternoon to an empty house, No note on the counter, no message on the answering machine. I made myself a peanut butter sandwich and did my homework at the kitchen table, watching the clock tick toward 6, then 7, then 8. My mother came home at 9 with Laura in tow, both of them glowing from some adventure I hadn't been invited to. A soccer game, my mother explained. Laura scored the winning goal. They went out for ice cream to celebrate. No one asked about my day. No one noticed I'd been alone for 5 hours. No one apologized. That became the pattern. Laura had soccer games and ballet recitals and birthday parties that required my mother's full attention. I had an empty house and a key around my neck, and the slowly forming understanding that I was on my own. By 13, I'd learned to stop expecting things. When I needed $25 for a school field trip, my mother said we couldn't afford it. That same week, Laura got a new dress for a dance. I told my teacher I was sick and stayed home while my classmates visited the science museum. I never mentioned the dress. There was no point. At 15, I got my first job. A grocery store 3 blocks from our house, stocking shelves after school and on weekends. I saved every dollar in a shoebox under my bed because when I asked my mother to help me open a savings account, she forgot. 3 times. I finally opened one myself on my 16th birthday, walking to the bank alone, signing the papers with a hand that didn't shake because I'd already learned that shaking hands got you nowhere. At 17, I received a full scholarship to Boston University. I was so excited I could barely breathe when I opened the letter. I ran downstairs to tell my family at dinner, the words spilling out of me in a rush. My mother smiled and said, "That's nice, honey." Then Laura announced she was trying out for cheerleading, and the conversation shifted. My scholarship was never mentioned again. Not at dinner, not at graduation, not ever. That night, my father came to my room. He sat on the edge of my bed and looked at me with eyes that saw everything my mother missed. "I'm proud of you, Em," he said. "A full scholarship. That's not luck, that's you." I wanted to cry, but I'd already learned that crying was a luxury I couldn't afford. "Mom didn't say anything," I said instead. My father was quiet for a long moment. "Your mother worries about Laura, because Laura needs worrying about. She doesn't worry about you because you've never given her a reason to." He paused. "That's not fair. I know it's not fair. It wasn't fair." But hearing him say it made something ease in my chest. At least someone saw me. At least someone knew. My father was the only one who ever did. And then, 3 years ago, he died. And I lost the only witness to my existence. I stood up from my desk and walked to the drawer where I kept his letter. Not the legal documents. A different envelope. This one was sealed, yellowed with age, my name written across the front in his handwriting. "For Emily," it said. "When you're ready." I'd received it from the estate attorney after my father's death. He'd left Laura $50,000 in cash, money that vanished within a year on shopping sprees and failed business ventures. He'd left me this envelope and a note that said, "You'll know when it's time." I held the letter in my hands, feeling its weight. I'd never opened it. Not because I was afraid of what was inside, but because I wanted to deserve it first. I wanted to prove that his faith in me wasn't misplaced. I wanted to earn whatever words he'd left behind. I put the envelope back in the drawer and closed it. Not yet, but soon. The afternoon passed slowly. I made dinner for one, ate standing at the kitchen counter, and thought about solitude versus loneliness. I'd chosen this life. The quiet apartment, the organized bookshelves, the absence of chaos that came with keeping my family at a distance. I didn't regret it. But sometimes late at night, I wondered what it would feel like to be part of something instead of apart from it. I'd built a life where I didn't need them. What I never figured out was how to stop wanting them to need me. Around 7 o'clock, I considered going to bed early. The day had been long, even though nothing had happened. Waiting was exhausting. Anticipating the storm was almost worse than weathering it. Then my doorbell rang. I froze. No one visited me without calling first, no one except delivery drivers, and I wasn't expecting any packages. I walked to the door and checked the security camera. The screen showed a woman standing in my hallway. her face flushed red, her phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. She was pacing back and forth, muttering to herself, clearly rehearsing whatever speech she planned to deliver. Laura. My sister had driven 45 minutes from the suburbs to downtown Boston on a December evening to confront me in person. She was wearing her expensive coat, the one that cost more than my first month's rent at my first apartment. Her hair was perfectly styled. Her nails were freshly manicured. She looked like a woman who had never worked a day in her life, which was almost true. I watched her for a moment through the camera. She raised her fist to knock, then lowered it, then raised it again. She was nervous. Good. She should be. I could ignore her. Pretend I wasn't home. Let her rage at an empty hallway until she got tired and left. That's what the old Emily would have done. The Emily who avoided conflict. The Emily who kept the peace by staying silent. But I wasn't that Emily anymore. I was the Emily who owned her family's house. The Emily who'd sent a legal notice to her own mother. The Emily who was done being invisible. I wanted to see Laura's face when she realized I wasn't backing down. I wanted to watch her understand for the first time in her life that she couldn't bully me into submission. I stood up, walked to the door, and paused with my hand on the lock. Through the camera, I watched my sister raise her fist to knock again. She looked furious. She looked scared. Good. It was about time someone in my family felt what I'd been feeling for years. I opened the door, and for the first time in our lives, Laura had to look up at me. Laura didn't wait for me to invite her in. The moment I turned the lock, she shoved past me like she still owned every room I walked into. Her heels clicked against my hardwood floors as she stormed into my living room. She was wearing that designer coat, the camel-colored one she'd bought last year with money she didn't have. Her leather bag probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her nails were painted a deep burgundy, fresh from a salon appointment that Nathan's credit card had funded. She spun around in the middle of my apartment, her eyes scanning every corner with barely concealed judgment. The clean lines of my furniture, the organized bookshelves, the single-framed photo of our father on the shelf. She looked at my life the way she'd always looked at me, like I was smaller than her, even when I wasn't. What the hell is wrong with you? She didn't wait for me to close the door. Her voice was already climbing toward that high-pitched register she used when she wanted to seem wounded. Do you have any idea what you've done? I shut the door quietly and leaned against it, arms crossed. I didn't say anything. I'd learned a long time ago that silence drew out more truth than questions ever could. Laura kept talking, her words tumbling over each other. She pulled out her phone and waved it at me, the screen showing my email from last night. "This legal notice," she said, practically spitting the words. "What is this supposed to be? Some kind of threat? Are you trying to scare Mom? Because congratulations, Emily, she's been crying all morning. Is that what you wanted?" I still didn't respond. I watched her pace across my living room, her agitation growing with every step. "You've always been jealous of me," she continued, "of our family, of the fact that Mom and I are close and you've always been on the outside. But this is low, even for you. You can't just send lawyers after your own family because your feelings got hurt about Christmas." She finally stopped pacing and stared at me, waiting for a reaction. Her chest was heaving. Her eyes were bright with anger and something else, something that looked almost like fear. I pushed myself off the door and walked toward her. My voice was calm when I finally spoke. "Did you actually read the email, Laura, or just the subject line?" Her eyes flickered. Just for a second, but I caught it. She hadn't read it carefully. Laura never read anything carefully. She just reacted. "I read enough," she said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. "Then you know it's not a threat. It's a notification of ownership and a request for a family meeting." I walked past her to my desk and opened the drawer. Nothing threatening about that. "Ownership?" Laura laughed, but it sounded hollow. "What are you talking about? That's Mom's house. It's been Mom's house since Dad built it. You can't just claim ownership because you're having some kind of midlife crisis." I pulled out the folder, the same one I'd looked at last night, the same documents I'd kept in that drawer for 3 years, waiting for the right moment. "Sit down, Laura." "I'm not sitting down. I'm not staying. I came here to tell you to stop whatever game you're playing and apologize to Mom before you ruin Christmas for everyone." I set the folder on the coffee table and looked at my sister. Really looked at her. The expensive clothes, the perfect hair, the indignation radiating off her like heat. She was so certain she was the victim here. She always was. "Sit down," I said again. "Or leave. But if you leave, the next conversation we have will be through attorneys." Something shifted in her face. Confusion, mostly. Laura wasn't used to me giving orders. She wasn't used to me standing firm. Our whole lives, I'd been the one who bent, who accommodated, who stepped aside to let her pass. Not anymore. She sat down on my couch slowly, like she was lowering herself into enemy territory. Her eyes were fixed on the folder. I opened it and spread the documents across the coffee table. One by one, I laid them out. The purchase agreement, the bank records, the property deed. "This is the deed for 247 Maple Street," I said. "Mom and Dad's house, the house you grew up in, the house you've been living in for the past 3 years. I tapped the document with my finger. "Notice the owner's name." Laura grabbed the paper and scanned it. I watched her face change as she read. Confusion, disbelief, denial. "This is fake," she said. Her voice was smaller now. "It's not fake. You forged this." "I didn't forge anything. The house has been in my name for 3 years, 2 months and 14 days. I bought it from First National Bank after Dad died." Laura shook her head like she was trying to dislodge water from her ears. "That's impossible. You can't just buy someone's house. You can when the bank is about to foreclose on it." The word hung in the air between us. Foreclose. I watched Laura try to process it. She looked at me, then at the deed, then back at me. Foreclose? That's ridiculous. Mom owns that house free and clear. Dad paid it off years ago. I almost felt sorry for her then. Almost. She genuinely didn't know. Either Mom had kept it from her, or Laura had never bothered to ask where the money was coming from. Probably both. "Mom hasn't owned that house free and clear in over a decade," I said quietly. "Someone took out loans against it. Multiple loans. By the time Dad died, the house was 63 days from foreclosure." Laura's face went pale. "Who took out loans?" I didn't answer. I let the silence do the work. Let her mind fill in the blanks I wasn't ready to confirm. Not yet. Not until the family meeting. "So what?" Laura's voice turned sharp again, defensive. "So you bought the house. That doesn't give you the right to threaten us, to send legal notices like we're strangers. I haven't threatened anyone. I sent a notification of ownership and requested a meeting." "A meeting?" She stood up, the deed crumpling slightly in her grip. "You want a meeting? Fine. Say whatever you need to say, not here, at the house. Tomorrow. 2 o'clock, with Mom, Nathan, and Aunt Grace." Laura froze at the mention of Aunt Grace. "Why would you invite her?" "Because someone in this family needs to witness the truth. And it's not going to be you." Her jaw tightened. I could see her calculating, trying to figure out my angle. Laura had always been good at manipulation, but she was terrible at strategy. She played checkers while I played chess. "What are you trying to do, Emily?" Her voice cracked. "Destroy this family?" I met her eyes without flinching. "This family destroyed itself a long time ago. I'm just turning on the lights." She stared at me for a long moment. Then, in a voice I'd never heard from her before, small and scared, she asked the question that had been hanging over both of us since she walked through my door. "Does this mean you can kick us out?" I let the silence stretch. I thought about the past 3 years. The mortgage payments I'd made every month, the property taxes, the insurance, the roof repair after last year's storm. All of it done quietly, without recognition, without thanks. All of it done while my mother and sister lived in my house and told me I wasn't welcome for Christmas. "It means I have the legal right to decide who lives in that house and under what terms," I said finally. "It means that for 3 years, I've paid the mortgage, the taxes, the insurance, while you and Mom lived there rent-free. It means that when you told me not to come home for Christmas, you were telling me not to come to my own property. I watched her face as the reality sank in. 3 years. Rent-free. In a house she thought belonged to her. Laura threw the deed back on the table. This isn't over. No, it's not. That's why we're having a family meeting. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., at the house. She grabbed her bag and stormed toward the door. Then she stopped, turned back, her eyes blazing with something between fury and desperation. You've been planning this, haven't you? Waiting for the perfect moment to humiliate us. I looked at my sister. At this woman who had taken so much and understood so little. I've been waiting for you to see me, I said quietly. This was the only way I knew how. She didn't respond. She left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frames on my wall. I stood alone in my apartment, my heart pounding despite my calm exterior. I picked up the deed Laura had crumpled and smoothed it carefully. That was round 1. Tomorrow would be harder. An hour later, my phone buzzed. Not Laura, not Mom, Nathan, Laura's husband, a man who had barely spoken 10 words to me in 4 years of marriage. His message was 3 sentences. I don't know what's happening. Laura won't stop crying. But I think we need to talk. Just you and me. I stared at the message. Nathan had never reached out to me before, which meant Laura had told him something that scared him, something that made him question his own wife. I typed back, tomorrow, before the family meeting, I'll tell you everything. Whatever Laura was hiding, her husband was about to find out. 3 years ago, I sat in a lawyer's office and discovered that my family's home, the house my father built with his own hands, was 63 days away from being taken by the bank. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 1 week after my father's funeral. The grief was still fresh, still raw, sitting in my chest like a stone I couldn't swallow. I'd taken time off work to handle the estate paperwork. Someone had to do it, and we all knew it wasn't going to be Laura. She was too busy being comforted by our mother, too consumed by her own dramatic displays of mourning to deal with anything practical. The estate attorney's name was Mr. Harrison. He was a quiet man with gray hair and kind eyes, the sort of person who delivered bad news gently because he'd done it so many times before. He sat across from me in his oak-paneled office and slid a folder across the desk. I need to show you something, Miss Carter, about your parents' house. I opened the folder expecting mortgage statements, maybe some property tax documents. What I found instead made my blood run cold. Outstanding balance, $217,000. Missed payments, 11 months. Foreclosure notice, dated 6 weeks ago. I looked up at Mr. Harrison. That's impossible. My parents paid off this house years ago. I remember the party they threw when they made the final payment. My father cried. Mr. Harrison's expression was sympathetic but firm. They refinanced, he said, multiple times. The first was in 2018, then again in 2019, and a third time in 2020. I did the math in my head. My father was diagnosed with cancer in 2018. By 2019, he was too sick to manage the household finances. By 2020, he was barely conscious most days. Someone else had been making these decisions. Someone else had been signing those refinancing documents. Who authorized this? My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Hollow. Mr. Harrison pulled out another sheet of paper. The signatures were all there, neat and familiar. Margaret Carter, my mother. I stared at her name, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My mother could barely balance a checkbook. She'd never handled the family finances. My father had always taken care of everything. Do you know where the money went? I asked. Mr. Harrison handed me another stack of papers. Bank statements, transfer records, a roadmap of financial destruction laid out in black and white. I started reading, and that's when I saw my sister's name, over and over and over again. $15,000 transferred to Laura's account in March of 2018, $20,000 in July of the same year, another $12,000 in October. The pattern continued through 2019, 2020, 2021. Credit card payoffs in Laura's name, a down payment on Laura's car, tuition for a business course Laura never finished, deposits into accounts I'd never heard of. I added up the numbers as I went. By the time I reached the end of the statements, my hands were shaking. Over $200,000. That's how much had been extracted from my father's house, from his life's work, from the legacy he'd spent 40 years building. And every penny of it had gone to Laura. I drove home that night in a daze. I spread the documents across my kitchen table and traced every dollar, following the money like a detective following footprints in the snow. The picture that emerged was devastating, but not surprising. Not really. Laura had maxed out her credit cards. Mom refinanced the house to pay them off. Laura wanted a new car. Mom took out a home equity line. Laura's business ventures failed. Mom covered the losses. Each time the house absorbed the debt. Each time, my father's equity disappeared into the bottomless pit of my sister's needs. My mother had turned my father's life's work into Laura's personal ATM, and my father had been too sick to stop her, or maybe he'd never known at all. I sat at that table until 3 a.m, running numbers and scenarios. The house was worth about $300,000 in its current condition. The debt was $217,000. At the current rate of missed payments, the bank would foreclose within 63 days. Everything my father had built would be sold at auction to the highest bidder. I could tell my mother. I could confront her with the evidence, force her to face what she'd done. But I knew exactly how that conversation would go. She'd cry. She'd make excuses. She'd find a way to blame someone else. And nothing would change. The house would still be lost. I could let it happen. Let the bank take the property. Walk away from the whole mess and tell myself it wasn't my problem. My father was gone. My mother had made her choices. Laura had taken everything that wasn't nailed down. Why should I sacrifice anything to save them? But it wasn't about them. It was about my father. He'd built that house in 1982, the year I was born. I had pictures of him standing in the frame, sawdust in his hair, a hammer in his hand. He'd finished the porch the summer I turned 8. I'd helped him paint the shutters when I was 12, both of us covered in blue paint by the end, laughing at the mess we'd made. That house wasn't just a building, it was him. His sweat, his dreams, his love made physical. I wasn't going to let Laura's shopping addiction erase 40 years of my father's work, not without a fight. The next morning, I called a real estate attorney named Diana Walsh. She wasn't a friend yet, just a name I'd gotten from a colleague. I explained the situation in clinical terms: a family home in foreclosure, a daughter who wanted to buy it, a need for absolute discretion. Diana listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked one question. Why the secrecy? I was quiet for a moment, trying to find the right words, because if they know I'm involved, they'll either guilt me into giving it back or resent me for having the means to save them. Either way, I lose. Diana understood immediately. She suggested an LLC, a legal entity that could purchase property without revealing the owner's name. We could buy the house from the bank, pay off the outstanding balance, and no one would ever know who was behind it. It took 2 months to finalize everything. I formed Carter Legacy Holdings, LLC. I negotiated with First National Bank. I liquidated a significant portion of my savings and took out a mortgage in the company's name. Total cost, $243,000, nearly everything I had. On a Tuesday afternoon in February, I signed the final papers in Diana's office. She witnessed my signature. No one else was there, no celebration, no fanfare, just paperwork and pen strokes and the quiet satisfaction of saving something that mattered. "How does it feel?" Diana asked when it was done. "You just bought your family's home, and they'll never know." I looked at the deed with my name on it, hidden behind layers of corporate structure. Like I finally have something that's mine, even if it's a secret. I told myself I'd reveal the truth eventually, when the time was right, when they'd proven they could be trusted. 3 years later, I was still waiting. For 3 years, I paid the mortgage every month through the LLC. I covered property taxes, insurance, repairs. When the roof leaked last winter, I hired a contractor and paid the bill without anyone knowing where the money came from. My mother and Laura continued living in the house, oblivious. They assumed they still owned it. They never checked the deed. They never asked questions. Meanwhile, Laura kept spending. New debts, new bailouts from Mom, new drains on resources that no longer existed. I watched from a distance, documenting everything, not planning revenge, building evidence, just in case. I visited the house exactly once during those 3 years. It was after a storm, and I wanted to check the roof. I parked across the street at 10 o'clock at night and watched the lights in the windows. My mother's silhouette moved past the living room curtain. Laura's car was in the driveway. I sat there for 20 minutes. Then I drove away without knocking. The present crashed back into focus. December 22nd. My phone buzzed with a text from Nathan confirming our meeting tomorrow morning. Then another notification. This one from Aunt Grace. Your father told me about you, Emily. He knew you were the only one who could save this family. When the time comes, I'll be there. And finally, a text from my mother. The first direct message she'd sent since telling me not to come for Christmas. Emily, please. We need to talk before tomorrow. There are things you don't know, things about your father. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I turned off my phone. Whatever she wanted to tell me, she'd had 38 years to say it. She could wait one more night. My mother showed up at my door for the second time in 3 days. But this time she wasn't looking for answers. She was looking for forgiveness she knew she didn't deserve. It was 9:47 in the evening, December 22nd. I'd been pacing my apartment since Nathan's warning about Laura, since my mother's cryptic text about things I didn't know. Diana was on standby, but there was nothing to do except wait for whatever came next. When the doorbell rang, I expected trouble. I checked the security camera and found my mother standing in the hallway, alone, holding a bottle of wine. She wasn't wearing a coat despite the December cold. Her hands were trembling. She looked 10 years older than she had 3 days ago. I opened the door and studied her for a moment. The woman who had raised me. The woman who had overlooked me. The woman who was finally, after 38 years, standing on my doorstep because she needed something from me. I know you're waiting for Laura to make her next move, she said quietly. I am too, but I couldn't sit in that house alone tonight. Not on Christmas Eve. It's December 22nd, Mom. Christmas Eve is in 2 days. She shook her head slightly. It feels like Christmas Eve. Everything feels like it's ending. I stepped aside and let her in. She walked past me slowly, like she was entering a stranger's home. In some ways she was. She'd never spent more than an hour in my apartment. She'd never really seen the life I'd built without her. I think it's time we really talked, she said, settling onto my couch. Not about the house, about us. I poured wine for both of us and sat in the chair across from her. The silence between us was different than it had been during her last visit. Less hostile, more exhausted. We'd both been through a war in the past 48 hours, and we were only at the beginning. I've never had both my daughters hate me at the same time, she said finally. It's a strange feeling. I don't hate you, Mom. You should, after everything I put you through. I didn't argue. I couldn't argue. Because part of me did hate her, or at least hated what she'd done, what she'd failed to do, the love she'd given so freely to Laura and rationed so carefully to me. When Laura called me after I defended you, my mother continued, she said things I've never heard from her before. She called me a traitor, said I was choosing you over her for the first time. She made it sound like a crime. She looked at me, her eyes wet. But it wasn't the first time, was it? It was just the first time she noticed. I let that settle before I responded. It was the first time for me, too. I don't remember you ever taking my side before. My mother flinched like I'd slapped her. I know. And I'm so sorry. But sorry wasn't enough anymore. I'd been accepting apologies my whole life. Apologies that changed nothing. Apologies that were followed by the same patterns, the same neglect, the same invisible treatment. This time I needed more than words. Why Laura? I asked. The question I'd been carrying for decades finally escaped my mouth. Why was she always the priority? My mother took a long drink of wine before answering. When I left David, she said slowly, when I escaped that marriage, Laura was all I had. She was 2 years old. I was terrified I'd ruined her life before it started. She stared into her glass like she was watching memories play across the surface. I swore I would protect her from everything. From the world, from struggle, from ever feeling abandoned the way I had felt. Then I met Robert, and we had you, and you were easy. I flinched at the word. She saw it. I don't mean that as an insult, she said quickly. You were self-sufficient from the moment you could walk. You solved your own problems. You never cried for help. Laura cried constantly. She needed reassurance, attention, validation, and I gave it to her, all of it, because I thought that's what protecting her meant. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice cracked. I didn't realize I was teaching her that she could take and take without consequences, and I didn't realize I was teaching you that you didn't matter enough to receive. The words hung between us. My mother had finally said what I'd always known but never heard spoken aloud. You taught me that needing anything was a weakness, I said quietly, so I stopped needing. And I punished you for being strong by treating your strength as permission to ignore you. For a moment, neither of us spoke. My mother's protection of Laura had been purchased with my invisibility. She finally saw the equation clearly. I could see it in her face. Do you remember my 16th birthday? I asked. She closed her eyes. I remember. I waited for you until 9 p.m., made my own cake from a box mix, ate it alone watching TV. You came home at 11 and said you forgot. I told myself it wasn't a big deal because you didn't seem upset. I was 16, Mom. I'd already learned not to show when I was upset. She didn't have a response to that. I continued. What about my college graduation? I looked for you in the crowd for 20 minutes during the ceremony. I told myself maybe you were running late, maybe you were in the bathroom. Laura had that fight with her boyfriend, my mother said weakly. She was hysterical. I thought you would understand. I did understand. That's the worst part. I understood so well that I stopped expecting you to show up. And when you finally didn't show up for enough things, I stopped inviting you. That's why you didn't tell me about your promotion, or your apartment, or your life. Why would I? You'd just find a way to make it about Laura. My mother set down her wine glass. Her hands were shaking again, worse than before. I've spent 64 years thinking I was a good mother, she said, that I did my best, that any mistakes were small, forgivable. She looked around my apartment, at the life I'd built without her. But looking at this place, at your career, at who you became, I realize I had nothing to do with any of it. You built all of this in spite of me, not because of me. She started crying then. Not the delicate tears she used when she wanted sympathy, real tears, the kind that came from somewhere deep and broken. I lost you decades ago, she said through her sobs. I was just too blind to notice. And now Laura is gone too, running to a man who will only use her, and I'm sitting here realizing I failed both of you in completely different ways. I watched my mother fall apart on my couch, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not vindication, something closer to grief. Grief for the relationship we could have had. Grief for the mother she could have been. You can't fix Laura, I said finally. She has to want to change, and right now she doesn't. What about us? My mother looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Can we be fixed? I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe that 3 days of honesty could undo 38 years of damage. But I'd stopped lying to myself a long time ago. I don't know if we can be fixed, I said carefully. But I know we can't even start unless things actually change. Not just tonight, permanently. Tell me what you need. Anything. I need you to see me. Not as the backup daughter. Not as the one who doesn't need attention. Me. I'm trying. Trying is a start. But I've spent 38 years watching you try with Laura and fail. I need to see that this time is different." My mother nodded slowly, accepting terms she didn't fully understand. "I'm not ready to forgive you," I added. "Forgiveness takes time, but acknowledgement is a start." "Then I'll keep acknowledging," she said quietly, "for as long as it takes." We sat in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence, not hostile, not frozen, just waiting. I refilled our wine glasses. A small gesture. A beginning. We'd been talking for 2 hours when my phone buzzed. A text from the building's front desk. "Miss Carter, there are 2 people here asking to see you. A woman named Laura Brennan and a man who says he's family." I showed the message to my mother. Her face went pale. "David," she whispered. "She brought David here." "I could tell them to leave," I said. "I don't have to let them up." My mother stood. Her spine straightened. Something shifted in her eyes. "No. I've been running from David Mercer for 34 years. I'm done running." She looked at me. "You wanted to see me change? This is me changing. I'm not hiding anymore." I texted the front desk. "Send them up." 2 minutes later, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Then a knock. I opened the door to find my sister standing next to a man I'd never seen before. Gray-haired, sharp-eyed, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Emily," Laura said flatly, "this is David, my father. He has something to tell you about yours." I met Nathan at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the house. Neutral ground, public space. No chance of Laura walking in and turning it into a scene. It was 8 o'clock in the morning, December 23rd, 6 hours before the family meeting. Last night I'd sent David and Laura away without letting them speak. My mother had stood beside me at the door, pale but resolute, and we'd simply closed it in their faces. Whatever David Mercer had come to say could wait until I had all the facts. Nathan arrived, looking like he hadn't slept. Dark circles under his eyes, shirt wrinkled, and his wedding ring was conspicuously absent from his finger. I noticed the bare finger but didn't comment. He sat across from me, ordered nothing, and got straight to the point. "I need to tell you something about Laura. Something I should have told someone a long time ago." I waited. I'd learned that silence drew out more truth than questions. "She's not who you think she is," Nathan said. His voice was flat, exhausted. "She's not who I thought she was either." He told me about the past 4 years of his marriage, the secret bank account he'd discovered 6 months ago, the money she'd been siphoning from their joint accounts, small amounts but consistent, then the loan application she'd forged his signature on last year, $35,000, money he knew nothing about until the collection notices started arriving. When I confronted her, Nathan said she cried, promised to change, blamed her difficult childhood. He laughed bitterly. I believed her. Every time I believed her. Because that's what she does. She makes you feel like the villain for noticing. "That sounds familiar," I said. I told him about the house, about the refinancing, the foreclosure, the money trail that led directly to Laura's accounts. He put his head in his hands. "I'm such an idiot." "You're not an idiot. You trusted your wife. That's what you were supposed to do." He looked up at me with something I hadn't expected. Gratitude. "You're the first person in this family who's told me the truth," he said. "Everyone else just protects her." I realized then that Nathan wasn't my enemy. He was another casualty. 6 hours later, I drove to the family home. 247 Maple Street. The house my father built. The house that had nearly been lost to my sister's greed. The house that now belonged to me. I parked in the driveway instead of on the street. It was a small thing, but it mattered. For 38 years, I'd parked on the street like a visitor. Today, I parked like an owner. The house looked the same as it always had. Colonial style, blue shutters my father had painted himself. The porch he'd rebuilt twice. I hadn't been inside in over a year. The last time, Laura had made a comment about my lonely apartment lifestyle and my mother had laughed. I'd left before dessert and sworn I wouldn't come back. But today was different. Today I wasn't a guest. I was the landlord. I used my key. the one I'd had for 3 years but never used. The door opened to the smell of my childhood. Cedar, old books, my mother's lavender sachets in the hallway closet. For a moment I was 8 years old again, running through these halls before I understood that I was invisible. Then I heard voices from the living room. Everyone was already here. I walked in to find them arranged like actors waiting for a play to begin. My mother sat in the armchair by the window, looking smaller than she had the night before. Laura was on the couch, arms crossed, refusing to make eye contact. Nathan stood by the far window, deliberately separate from his wife, and in the corner chair, white-haired and sharp-eyed, sat Aunt Grace. She was holding a manila envelope and watching me with an expression I couldn't read. The tension in that room was thick enough to choke on. Laura's leg bounced with agitation. My mother's hands twisted in her lap. Nathan stared at the floor. Only Aunt Grace looked calm, like she'd been waiting for this moment for years. I didn't sit. I walked to the fireplace and stood in my father's spot, the place where he used to stand when he had something important to say. I set my folder on the mantel. "Thank you for coming," I said. "I know this isn't how any of you wanted to spend the day before Christmas Eve, but we need to have a conversation that's been delayed far too long." Laura snapped immediately. "This is ridiculous. We don't need a family meeting to discuss your power trip." I ignored her and continued. In 2018, our father was diagnosed with cancer. That same year, Mom refinanced this house for the first time. Between 2018 and 2021, the house was refinanced 3 more times. Total debt accumulated, $217,000. I pulled documents from my folder and spread them on the coffee table. The money went to pay off Laura's credit cards, her car loan, her failed business ventures, and various emergencies that always seemed to involve her. By the time Dad died, this house was 63 days from foreclosure. I looked around the room. None of you knew because none of you were paying attention. You were too busy pretending everything was fine. My mother stared at the floor. She'd known most of this already. Laura's face cycled through shock, denial, and settling finally on anger. Nathan's jaw tightened with every number I spoke. Aunt Grace nodded slowly, unsurprised. "So I bought the house," I continued. "Through an LLC, I paid off the bank, took over the mortgage, and have been maintaining this property for 3 years. You've been living rent-free in my house since 2021. Laura stood up so fast she knocked over her coffee cup. The brown liquid spread across the carpet, but no one moved to clean it. "You're lying. This is some kind of scam." "Mom, tell her she's lying." My mother didn't move, didn't speak. Her silence was its own confession. Laura turned her fury on me. "You did this to control us, to hold it over our heads. You've always been jealous of me, of my marriage, my life, everything. This is your revenge because Mom asked you not to come for Christmas. If I wanted control," I said calmly, "I would have evicted you the day I signed the deed. I didn't. If I wanted revenge, I would have let the bank take the house and watched you scramble. I didn't. I did this because Dad built this house with his own hands, and I wasn't going to let anyone, not the bank, not your debt, take it from our family." I turned to my mother. "I didn't tell you because I knew you wouldn't understand. I knew you'd find a way to make it about Laura. I knew you'd ask me to give it back to her." My mother said nothing. There was nothing she could say. "So what?" Laura's voice was rising. "You're going to throw us out? Ruin Christmas? I haven't decided anything yet." "That depends on what happens in this room today." Aunt Grace stood slowly, the manila envelope in her hands. Her presence commanded attention in a way that silenced even Laura. "If I may," she said. The room fell quiet. Grace was the family elder, my father's generation. Her voice carried weight. "Robert knew this day would come," she said. "Not the specifics, but he knew there would be a reckoning." She looked around the room. "Your father came to me before he died. He was worried about the house, about the debt, about Margaret's decisions. He told me Emily is the only one who can save this family. When the time comes, support her." She turned to look directly at me. "I've watched this family overlook Emily for 38 years. Robert saw it too. It broke his heart. She paused. Your father was proud of you, Emily. He knew you'd do the right thing. He trusted you more than anyone. My mother was crying quietly now. Nathan had moved closer to where I stood, a silent shift of alliance. Laura looked like she'd been slapped. This is all a setup, Laura exploded. You've been planning this for years. You and Dad and Grace. You've always hated me. No one hates you, Laura, I said. But no one can keep protecting you from yourself either. I don't need protection. I need a family that doesn't constantly judge me. She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. Then she stopped and turned to Nathan. Aren't you coming? Nathan didn't move. His voice was quiet but firm. No. I think I need to hear the rest of this. Laura stared at her husband, then at me, then at our mother who wouldn't meet her eyes. You're all going to regret this, she said. Every single one of you. She slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. The silence after Laura left was deafening. No one moved, no one spoke. Then Nathan walked to the couch and sat down heavily. There's more, he said quietly. Things about Laura that none of you know. Things I found last week. He pulled out his phone and opened an app. He turned the screen toward us. She's been transferring money to an account I've never seen before. $15,000 in the past 3 months alone. And the account holder is not in her name. It's in the name of someone called David Mercer. Aunt Grace's face went pale. Who is David Mercer? I asked. Grace looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. He's Laura's biological father. The man your mother was married to before Robert. The man we all thought was dead. The name hung in the air like smoke. David Mercer. Laura's biological father. A man everyone thought was dead. A man my sister had been secretly sending money to for months. I looked at my mother. Her face had gone white. Her hands gripped the armchair so tightly her knuckles looked like bone. Mom, I said, who is David Mercer? She couldn't answer. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She looked like a woman watching her house burn down. Aunt Grace stepped forward. I think it's time you heard the full story, Emily. The story your mother has been hiding for 38 years. Nathan leaned forward on the couch, his confusion matching mine. Wait. Laura told me her father died when she was a baby, a car accident. Grace shook her head slowly. That's the story Margaret told everyone. But David Mercer didn't die in a car accident. He went to prison. The room seemed to contract around those words. I stared at my aunt, waiting for an explanation that made sense. None of this matched anything I'd ever been told about my family, about my mother, about Laura. Grace took control of the narrative because my mother clearly couldn't speak. Margaret married David Mercer when she was 19, Grace began. She was young, naive, desperate to escape our childhood home. David was charming at first. They all are. Then he became controlling, then violent. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Laura was born in 1990. By then, the marriage was a nightmare. David ran a series of scams, insurance fraud, identity theft, forgery. He was good at it for a while, but criminals always get caught eventually. When Laura was 2 years old, Grace continued, David was arrested for embezzlement and fraud. The FBI had been building a case against him for months. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. I looked at my mother. She was crying silently now, tears streaming down her face without a sound. Margaret was humiliated, Grace said. She told everyone David died in a car accident. She moved to Boston, changed her last name back, started over. She met Robert 3 years later. He adopted Laura, gave her his name, raised her as his own. Robert knew the truth, Grace added. He was the only one who did. Besides me. I processed this information slowly, turning it over in my mind like a strange object I'd found on the street. We had different fathers. Laura and I were half-sisters. Robert had been my biological father, but not hers. He'd adopted Laura, raised her as his own, never treated her differently. Or maybe he had treated her differently. Maybe that was why my mother had always been so protective. so terrified of Laura falling apart. "Did Laura know?" I asked. "About David?" My mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told her when she turned 18. She was furious, said I'd lied to her whole life." Grace nodded. "Laura went through a difficult period after that. Acting out, spending money, making bad decisions. Margaret thought giving her more support would help her heal." I connected the dots immediately. That's when the favoritism got worse. "You were compensating. I was trying to make up for the trauma I caused her," my mother said, "and I paid the price for Laura's healing." The words came out flat, without accusation, just stating a fact. For 38 years I'd been sacrificed on the altar of Laura's fragile psyche. Every time my mother chose her over me, every time I was overlooked or forgotten, it was because Laura was broken and I wasn't. I finally understood why. But understanding didn't make 38 years of invisibility hurt any less. Nathan spoke up, his voice tight with frustration. "This still doesn't explain why Laura's sending money to him now. If he was in prison, if he's supposedly been dead for 30 years, why is she transferring $15,000 to his account?" Grace sighed. "David was released from prison 8 years ago. He served his full sentence. No early parole for good behavior." She paused. "He reached out to Laura about a year after that." My mother's head snapped up. "What? She never told me." "She didn't tell anyone," Grace said. "I only know because I saw them together once about 5 years ago, at a restaurant in Cambridge. I confronted Laura afterward. She begged me not to tell Margaret." Nathan pulled out his phone again, scrolling through the records he'd compiled. 15,000 in the past 3 months, he said. "But the pattern goes back further. I've traced payments going back at least 2 years." He looked up at us. Total estimate, over $80,000. $80,000. Laura had drained our family home of $200,000 to pay off her debts. Now she was draining her husband of $80,000 more, and all of it was flowing to a man who should have stayed a ghost. "Is he blackmailing her?" I asked. "Or is she helping him willingly?" No one had an answer. "David Mercer is a con man," Grace said finally. "Whatever he's doing, it's not out of fatherly love." Nathan stood up and walked to the window. His shoulders were rigid with tension. "I've been married to her for 4 years," he said. 4 years of lies. He turned to face us. "The forged loan application wasn't the only thing I found. There's a secret bank account, the transfers to David Mercer, and credit card debt she hid from me. Another $40,000. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I thought I knew her. I thought we were building a life together. I thought she loved me." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said the words I'd been expecting since I saw his bare ring finger that morning. "I can't do this anymore. I've already talked to a divorce attorney." My mother gasped. "Nathan, please, give her a chance to explain." Nathan turned to her, not unkindly but firmly. "Mrs. Carter, I've given her dozens of chances. Every time she cries, promises to change, and then does the same thing again. I'm done being her safety net." I understood Nathan completely. I'd watched the same pattern my whole life. Laura would mess up, someone would rescue her, she'd promise to do better, then she'd mess up again. The cycle never ended because no one ever let her face the consequences. "For what it's worth," I said to Nathan, "I'm sorry. You deserved better." He met my eyes. "So did you." "What are you going to do?" he asked me. "About the house? About all of this?" "I don't know yet, but I'm not making any decisions tonight." The room fell into an exhausted silence. The revelations of the past hour had drained all of us. Half-sisters, a con man father, $80,000 stolen, a marriage ending. It was too much to process at once. My mother finally spoke, her voice small but clear. "I've made so many mistakes," she said. "With Laura, with you, with this house." She looked around the room at the walls my father had built, the floors he'd laid, the home he'd created for a family that had fallen apart. "Your father tried to warn me," she said. "Near the end, he said I was losing you. He said if I didn't stop, you'd never forgive me." She met my eyes. He was right. I was so focused on fixing Laura that I broke the one daughter who didn't need fixing. I didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't okay. I didn't offer comfort. I just listened. "I don't expect you to forgive me," my mother continued, "but I need you to know I see it now. I see what I did." "Seeing it is a start," I said quietly. "But seeing isn't the same as changing." "I know." Aunt Grace prepared to leave, reminding me about the envelope she'd mentioned. "Tomorrow," she said. "Christmas Eve, come to my house in the morning. There's something Robert wanted you to have." I nodded, too drained to ask questions. Nathan left next, promising to be in touch. His handshake was firm. His eyes were sad but clear. He knew what he had to do. My mother was the last to go. She paused at the door. "Will you come for Christmas?" she asked. "Not to fix anything, just to be here. I'll think about it." After she left, I sat alone in the house. My house. The silence was heavy with everything that had been said. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Laura. "You think you've won. You think you're the hero. But I know things about you too, Emily. Things that would change everything. This isn't over." I stared at the message for a long time. What could Laura possibly know? I'd spent my life being careful, being invisible, being the daughter no one noticed. What secrets could she have found? Then I remembered. Laura had access to this house for years, to Dad's office, to his files, to everything. If she'd been looking for ammunition, she'd had plenty of time to find it. I typed back 2 words: "Try me." Then I turned off my phone, locked the front door of my house, and drove home through streets already glittering with Christmas lights. Whatever Laura thought she had on me, I wasn't going to lose sleep over it. I'd lost enough sleep over my family already. I woke up on Christmas Eve to find my name trending in our family's Facebook group. Laura had been busy overnight. It was 7:23 in the morning when I checked my phone out of habit. 17 tags in family group posts. 42 comments. 8 private messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. My stomach dropped before I even opened the app. Laura's post was time-stamped 2:47 a.m. She'd written it in rage and posted it in spite, probably after a bottle of wine and hours of stewing over what had happened at the family meeting. "My sister Emily has been lying to our family for years," she'd written. "She secretly bought our mother's house and is now threatening to throw us out on Christmas. She's using our father's death to control and manipulate us. I always knew she was jealous, but I never thought she'd stoop this low." The post had 63 reactions. Most were angry faces directed at me. Some were hearts supporting Laura. The comments were worse. Cousin Rebecca wrote, "This is horrible." Emily was always cold, but this is next level. Uncle Thomas added, "Margaret must be devastated. Some children have no gratitude." Aunt Patricia chimed in with, "Prayers for Laura during this difficult time." Second cousin Mark, someone I'd met exactly twice in my life, declared, "Who steals their own mother's house? Disgusting." Not a single person had asked for my side of the story. Not a single person had questioned Laura's version of events. The narrative was already set. Emily was the villain. Laura was the victim. Case closed. I scrolled through comment after comment, cataloging the damage. People I'd known my whole life were condemning me based on one angry Facebook post. People who'd never called to check on me, never asked about my life, never noticed when I disappeared from family gatherings, were suddenly experts on my character. I'd spent my whole life trying to be invisible. Now Laura had made me visible as the enemy. But she'd made a mistake. In her rush to destroy me publicly, she'd put her accusations in writing. Every claim she made was documented, and I had evidence that proved every single one of them was a lie. If she wanted a public war, I'd give her one. But I'd fight it with evidence, not emotions. I called Diana Walsh at 7:45. She answered immediately, already awake. I saw the Facebook post, Diana said. One of my associates flagged it. I was about to call you. Her assessment was clinical and clear. Laura's post was potentially defamatory. She was accusing me of fraud, manipulation, and theft in a public forum. None of it was true. We had options: a cease and desist letter, a defamation lawsuit, or a public correction backed by documentation. I considered each option carefully. A lawsuit would drag this out for years, and I had no interest in spending my life in court with my sister. A cease and desist would look like I was trying to silence her, which would only make me seem more guilty. I don't want to sue my sister, I told Diana. I want to end this. Then we release the documentation, Diana said. Show everyone the truth. Bank records, foreclosure notices, the deed, your payment history. Let the facts speak for themselves. I hesitated. That will humiliate her. She humiliated you first. And she lied while doing it. Diana's voice was firm. The truth isn't revenge, Emily. It's defense. If I do this, there's no going back. There was no going back the moment she hit post. She chose the battlefield. You're just choosing your weapons. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Unknown number. I told Diana I'd call her back and answered. A man's voice, smooth and professional, filled my ear. Miss Carter? This is Bradley Simmons from Simmons & Associates. I represent your sister, Laura Brennan. My stomach tightened. Laura had hired a lawyer overnight. She'd escalated from social media to legal threats in less than 12 hours. Bradley Simmons laid out his client's position in careful legal language. Laura was claiming undue influence in my purchase of the house. She was demanding I transfer the property back to my mother as it should have been. If I refused, she would file a lawsuit and seek a restraining order. My client feels unsafe, Simmons said. Your behavior has been threatening and manipulative. I let him finish. Then I responded in a voice as calm and professional as his. Mr. Simmons, did your client tell you she's been stealing money from her husband? That she's been secretly funneling funds to her biological father, a convicted felon? Silence on the other end. Did she tell you the house was 63 days from foreclosure when I bought it? That I've been paying the mortgage for 3 years while she lived there rent-free? That the debt she accumulated through multiple refinancings was what nearly destroyed our family's home? More silence. I suggest you verify your client's claims before threatening me. I'll have my attorney send you the documentation. Bradley Simmons cleared his throat. I'll review the materials and be in touch. He hung up quickly. I'd heard that tone before. The sound of a lawyer realizing their client had lied to them. I drove to Diana's office. It was Christmas Eve, but she met me there anyway. We spent 3 hours assembling a comprehensive document package, the foreclosure notice from First National Bank, my LLC purchase agreement and deed transfer, 3 years of mortgage payments, property taxes, and insurance premiums, all paid by me. Bank statements showing the money trail from the house refinancing directly into Laura's accounts. Nathan's documentation of the forged loan and secret transfers. Diana outlined our strategy. We send this to Bradley Simmons. That kills any lawsuit before it starts. Then we post a measured response on Facebook. Not attacking Laura, just the facts. Let people draw their own conclusions. What about my mother? I asked. This will humiliate her too. The refinancing, the enabling, it's all documented. Diana looked at me with something like sympathy. Your mother made choices. She can own them or not. But you shouldn't sacrifice your reputation to protect hers. I thought about my mother's face from 2 nights ago. The tears, the confession. She was finally starting to see the truth. Would this public exposure destroy that progress? Or would it force her to stop hiding once and for all? At 11 o'clock, I sent the documentation package to Bradley Simmons. Diana followed up with a formal letter stating that any lawsuit would be met with a counterclaim for defamation, that I had clear legal ownership of the property, and that Laura's accusations were demonstrably false. If Laura continued her public attacks, I would pursue all legal remedies. For the Facebook response, I took Diana's advice and didn't post myself. Instead, I called Aunt Grace. Grace posted a simple statement to the family group at noon. There are two sides to every story. Before passing judgment on Emily, ask to see the documentation. The truth is more complicated than one angry post at 3 a.m. She added, I've known this family for 68 years. Emily is not the villain here. The reaction was immediate. Comments started shifting. Some family members messaged me privately asking for my side. Others went quiet, the mob mentality broken by a single voice of reason. At 2 o'clock my phone rang. My mother. I answered reluctantly. Mom. Her voice was shaky but not angry. I saw Grace's post, and the comments changing. I waited. Laura called me this morning, my mother continued. She's furious. She says you're trying to ruin her. I'm defending myself against her lies. There's a difference. A long pause stretched between us. Then my mother said something I never expected to hear. I know. I told her that. I nearly dropped my phone. You defended me? To Laura? I told her the truth, my mother said, that she lied in that post, that you saved this house, that I was the one who made the mistakes, not you. Another pause. She hung up on me, my mother added quietly. She's never done that before. I sat in Diana's office, speechless. My mother had defended me. For the first time in my memory, she'd chosen me over Laura. Mom, I finally said. Thank you. It's 38 years too late, she replied. But I'm trying. After I hung up, I stared out the window at Boston covered in light snow. Christmas Eve turning the city white. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something I couldn't predict. My phone buzzed. A text from Nathan. Laura just left our apartment. She took a suitcase and wouldn't say where she's going. She was on the phone with someone. I heard her say, I'm coming to you, Dad. David Mercer. Laura was running to David Mercer. I forwarded the message to Diana with 3 words. We have a problem. Whatever Laura was planning, she wasn't done fighting. And now she had a convicted con man helping her strategize. The war wasn't over. It was just changing battlefields. My mother showed up at my door for the second time in 3 days. But this time, she wasn't looking for answers. She was looking for forgiveness she knew she didn't deserve. It was 7:30 in the evening on Christmas Eve. I'd been pacing my apartment for hours, ever since Nathan's warning that Laura had taken a suitcase and gone to David Mercer. Diana was on standby. There was nothing to do but wait and prepare for whatever came next. When the doorbell rang, I checked the security camera expecting trouble. Instead, I found my mother standing in the hallway holding a bottle of wine. She looked 10 years older than she had that morning. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Her hands trembled as she clutched the bottle like a lifeline. I know you're waiting for Laura to make her next move, she said when I opened the door. I am too. But I couldn't sit in that house alone tonight. Not on Christmas Eve. I stepped aside and let her in. She walked past me slowly, her eyes taking in my apartment like she was seeing it for the first time. The clean lines, the organized bookshelves, the life I'd built without her help. I think it's time we really talked, she said. Not about the house, not about Laura, about us. I poured wine for both of us. We sat in my living room, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The silence felt different than it had during our last conversation. Less hostile, more exhausted. We'd both been through a war and we were only at the halfway point. I've never had both my daughters hate me at the same time, my mother said finally. It's a strange feeling. I don't hate you, Mom. You should. After everything I put you through. I didn't argue. Part of me did hate her, or at least hated what she'd done. What she'd failed to do. When Laura called me this afternoon, my mother continued, after I defended you, she said things I've never heard from her before. She called me a traitor, said I was choosing you over her for the first time. She paused. She made it sound like a crime. My mother looked at me with wet eyes. But it wasn't the first time, was it? It was just the first time she noticed. It was the first time for me, too. I don't remember you ever taking my side before. She flinched. I know. And I'm so sorry. But sorry wasn't enough anymore. I'd been accepting apologies my whole life. Apologies that changed nothing. Apologies that were followed by the same patterns, the same neglect, the same invisible treatment. This time, I needed more than words. Why Laura? I asked. The question I'd carried for 38 years finally found its way out. Why was she always the priority? My mother took a long drink of wine before answering. When I left David, she said slowly, when I escaped that marriage, Laura was all I had. She was 2 years old, and I was terrified I'd ruined her life before it started. I swore I would protect her from everything. From struggle, from pain, from ever feeling abandoned the way I had felt. She stared into her wine glass like she was watching her past play across the surface. Then I met Robert, and we had you, and you were easy. I flinched at the word. I don't mean that as an insult, she said quickly. You were self-sufficient from the moment you could walk. You solved your own problems. You never cried for help. Laura cried constantly. She needed reassurance, attention, validation. I gave it to her because I thought that's what protecting her meant. My mother's voice cracked. I didn't realize I was teaching her that she could take and take without consequences. And I didn't realize I was teaching you that you didn't matter enough to receive. The equation was finally clear. Her protection of Laura had been purchased with my invisibility. She saw it now. I could see the recognition in her face. You taught me that needing anything was a weakness, I said quietly. So I stopped needing. And I punished you for being strong by treating your strength as permission to ignore you. We sat with those words for a moment. Then I decided to share what I'd never said aloud. Not in anger, just in truth. Do you remember my 16th birthday? She closed her eyes. I remember. I waited for you until 9 p.m. Made my own cake from a box mix. Ate it alone watching TV. You came home at 11 and said you forgot. I told myself it wasn't a big deal because you didn't seem upset. I was 16, Mom. I'd already learned not to show when I was upset. She had no response to that. I continued. My college graduation. I looked for you in the crowd for 20 minutes during the ceremony. I told myself maybe you were running late. Maybe you were in the bathroom. Laura had that fight with her boyfriend. She was hysterical. I thought you would understand. I did understand. That's the worst part. I understood so well that I stopped expecting you to show up. And when you didn't show up for enough things, I stopped inviting you. That's why you didn't tell me about your promotion, my mother whispered, or your apartment, or your life. Why would I? You'd just find a way to make it about Laura. My mother set down her wine glass. Her whole body was shaking now. I've spent 64 years thinking I was a good mother, she said, that I did my best, that any mistakes were small, forgivable. She looked around my apartment, but looking at this place, at your career, at who you became, I realize I had nothing to do with any of it. You built all of this in spite of me. Not because of me. She started crying then, real tears, the kind that come from somewhere broken. I lost you decades ago, she said through her sobs. I was just too blind to notice. And now Laura is gone too, running to a man who will only use her. And I'm sitting here realizing I failed both of you in completely different ways. I watched my mother fall apart, and I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, not vindication, something closer to grief. Grief for the relationship we could have had. Grief for the mother she could have been. You can't fix Laura, I said finally. She has to want to change. And right now, she doesn't. What about us? My mother looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Can we be fixed? I wanted to say yes. I wanted to believe that a few days of honesty could undo 38 years of damage. But I'd stopped lying to myself a long time ago. I don't know if we can be fixed, I said carefully. But I know we can't even start unless things actually change. Not just tonight. Permanently. Tell me what you need, she said. Anything. I need you to see me, not as the backup daughter, not as the one who doesn't need attention. Me. I'm trying is a start. But I've spent 38 years watching you try with Laura and fail. I need to see that this time is different. My mother nodded slowly. I'm not ready to forgive you, I added. Forgiveness takes time, but acknowledgement is a start. Then I'll keep acknowledging, she said quietly, for as long as it takes. We sat in silence after that. But it was a different kind of silence, not hostile, not frozen, just waiting. I refilled our wine glasses. A small gesture, a beginning. We'd been talking for 2 hours when my phone buzzed. A text from the building's front desk. Miss Carter, there are 2 people here asking to see you. A woman named Laura Brennan and a man who says he's family. I showed the message to my mother. Her face went pale. David, she whispered. She brought David here. I can tell them to leave, I said. I don't have to let them up. My mother stood. Something shifted in her posture. Her spine straightened, her chin lifted. No, I've been running from David Mercer for 34 years. I'm done running. She looked at me with steady eyes. You wanted to see me change? This is me changing. I'm not hiding anymore. I texted the front desk. Send them up. 2 minutes later, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Then a knock. I opened the door to find my sister standing next to a gray-haired man with sharp eyes and a smile that didn't reach his face. Emily, Laura said flatly, this is David, my father. He has something to tell you about yours. David Mercer extended his hand. I didn't take it. Your father and I were business partners once, he said, still wearing that empty smile, before he stole everything from me and left me to rot in prison. I think it's time the truth came out, don't you? Behind me, I heard my mother gasp. Whatever I thought I knew about my family was about to be shattered all over again. And this time, it wasn't Laura's secrets being exposed. It was my father's. David Mercer stood in my living room like he owned it. The same way, I imagined, he'd once stood in my mother's life before she found the courage to escape him. I took in the scene. Laura stood rigid beside him, her face tight with anger, and something else I couldn't quite read. David exuded false charm, his smile fixed in place like a mask. Behind me, my mother had gone completely still. David still had his hand extended. I hadn't taken it. I don't shake hands with strangers who show up uninvited on Christmas Eve making accusations, I said. He withdrew his hand, but the smile never wavered. Fair enough. But I'm not a stranger, Emily. I'm family, whether you like it or not. You're Laura's biological father. That doesn't make you my family. No, he agreed, but what your father did to me makes us connected, like it or not. Laura stepped forward impatiently. Just tell her, David. Tell her what kind of man Robert Carter really was. David made himself comfortable without being invited. He sat in my armchair, crossed his legs, and spoke like a man who'd rehearsed this moment for years. His voice was calm, measured, and poisonous. Robert and I were partners in the early 90s, he began. A real estate investment company, small but growing. We pooled our resources, my capital, his connections. We were going to build something together. I remained standing, arms crossed, watching him. Then Robert discovered some irregularities in my accounting, David continued. You mean he discovered you were committing fraud? I said flatly. His smile tightened. I mean he found something he could use against me, and instead of coming to me like a partner, he went to the FBI. He leaned forward in the chair, his eyes fixed on mine. But here's what the official story doesn't tell you, he said. Before he turned me in, Robert transferred our joint assets into his name. The properties, the accounts, everything. David's voice hardened. He testified against me, kept the money, and built his perfect life with my wife, raising my daughter, on the foundation of what he stole from me. He gestured around my apartment. That house you're so proud of owning? It was built with money that belonged to me. I let his words hang in the air for a moment. Then I asked the question that would determine everything. That's a fascinating story. Do you have any proof? David's smile flickered. Just for a second, but I caught it. He hadn't expected me to ask for evidence. Con men rarely do. They rely on emotion, not documentation. Before he could respond, my mother stepped forward. Her voice was shaking, but her words were clear. You're a liar, David. You've always been a liar. He turned to her, his mask slipping slightly. Margaret, still defending a dead man. Robert didn't steal anything from you, my mother said, her voice growing stronger. You lost everything because you were a criminal. The FBI didn't need Robert's testimony. They had your own records. She took another step toward him. I was there, David. I saw what you did. The fake invoices, the stolen identities, the clients you defrauded. Robert found out, and he did the right thing. He reported you because you were hurting people. The only thing Robert took from you was me and Laura, and we weren't yours to keep. David's expression darkened. You always did choose him over me. I chose safety over fear, my mother replied. I chose honesty over lies. That's not the same thing. David turned to Laura. You see, she's been brainwashed for 30 years. They all have. I watched Laura's face. For the first time, I saw doubt in her eyes. She was looking between David and our mother, uncertain which version of history to believe. I stepped between David and my mother. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to leave my apartment. Tonight. I'm not finished, David started. Yes. You are. I pulled out my phone. I have my attorney on speed dial. She's already aware of your history. The fraud conviction, the prison sentence, the fact that you've been extracting money from my sister for years. David's eyes narrowed, but I continued. If you don't leave in the next 2 minutes, I will call the police and have you removed. Then I'll file a restraining order. Then I'll contact your parole officer, and yes, I know you're still on parole, and report that you've been harassing my family. The mask finally slipped. Real anger surfaced on David's face. You're just like him, he said. Robert, cold, calculating. If protecting my family makes me like my father, I'll take that as a compliment. I watched David Mercer realize he'd miscalculated. He'd expected a grieving daughter, easily manipulated. Instead, he found someone who'd spent her whole life preparing to stand her ground. David stood, gathering his coat. He turned to Laura. Are you coming? The room held its breath. Laura looked at me, at our mother, at David, the man who'd abandoned her before she could walk, the man who'd come back into her life only to drain her bank accounts. Laura, I said quietly, he's using you. Whatever he's told you, whatever he's promised, he's using you to get to us, to get money. That's what he does. Laura's voice cracked. You don't know anything about him. I know he took $80,000 from you. I know your husband is filing for divorce because of the debt you've hidden. I know you're about to lose everything, and David Mercer is not going to save you. Laura's eyes filled with tears. Anger and fear and confusion all mixed together. My mother stepped forward. Laura, please, come home with me. We can talk about this. Laura looked at David one more time. He shrugged. Your choice. But when they turn on you again, and they will, you know where to find me. He walked to the door, opened it, and paused. This isn't over, Emily. Your father wasn't the saint you think he was. Then he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him. Laura didn't follow. She stayed. After everything, after the Facebook post and the lawyer and bringing David to my door, she stayed. The three of us stood in silence. Laura sank onto the couch and put her head in her hands. I didn't know what else to do, she said, her voice muffled. I was so angry, and David made it sound like you were the enemy, like everyone was against me. Everyone has been protecting you, I said, for 38 years. That's the opposite of being against you. Laura looked up, mascara streaking her cheeks. Protecting me by keeping secrets? By letting me believe my father died in a car accident? I was trying to save you from his shadow, my mother said. I never wanted you to know what he was. Laura was quiet for a moment. Then she said, He contacted me after Dad died, after Robert died, said he wanted to reconnect, said he'd changed. How much did you give him? I asked. Her answer was barely audible. Everything. Everything Nathan and I had saved. And more. Before anyone could respond, my phone rang. Nathan's name on the screen. I answered. Nathan. His voice was calm, resolved. I filed the divorce papers this morning. It's done. I glanced at Laura. She couldn't hear his words, but she knew something was wrong. I wanted you to know first, Nathan continued, and I wanted to thank you. Thank me? For telling the truth. Everyone else in that family protected Laura from consequences. You showed me what was actually happening. He paused. My lawyer says she'll be served tomorrow, Christmas Day. I know it's harsh, but I can't wait anymore. What about David? He was here tonight. I know. Laura texted me that she was going to expose you. When I saw David's name, I realized she was too far gone for me to save. His voice softened. Take care of yourself, Emily. You're the only honest person in that family. He hung up. I lowered the phone and looked at my sister. She was watching me, mascara streaked, shoulders hunched, smaller than I'd ever seen her. That was Nathan, I said quietly. I know, her voice cracked. He's leaving me, isn't he? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Laura closed her eyes. When she opened them, something had changed. The defiance was gone. In its place was something I hadn't seen from my sister in decades. Fear. Real fear. The kind that comes when you finally realize there's no one left to catch you. My mother sat down next to Laura and put an arm around her. Laura didn't pull away. I stood apart, watching my mother comfort my sister on Christmas Eve in my living room, while outside the snow fell silently on Boston. We weren't healed, we weren't fixed, but for the first time in 38 years, we were in the same room, facing the same truth. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. I woke up on Christmas morning alone in my apartment, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel lonely. I felt like I was waiting for something my father had been saving for me all along. The light filtering through my windows was soft and gray. Boston was covered in overnight snow, the city transformed into something quiet and clean. I lay in bed for a few minutes, listening to the silence, thinking about everything that had happened in the past 4 days. My phone showed a text from Aunt Grace, sent at 6:30 in the morning. Merry Christmas, Emily. Come to my house when you're ready. Your father has been waiting to talk to you. I read it twice. Your father has been waiting, present tense, as if he were still alive. As if whatever she had for me would bring him back, even for a moment. I showered and dressed slowly. Made coffee and drank it standing at the window, watching the snow-covered streets below. Then I got in my car and drove through the empty Christmas morning roads to Aunt Grace's house in Brookline. Her home was a small colonial on a quiet street. Even in winter, her garden was immaculate. A Christmas wreath hung on the front door. Smoke curled from the chimney. She opened the door before I could knock. I saw you pull up, she said. Come in, coffee's ready. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine. A real Christmas home, the kind I'd imagined having someday but never quite achieved. Grace led me to the living room, where a small fire burned in the fireplace. On the coffee table sat the manila envelope from the family meeting. But next to it was something else. A sealed letter, yellowed with age. My name was written across the front in my father's handwriting. I stopped breathing for a moment. Your father gave me 2 things before he died, Grace said softly. The envelope I showed everyone at the meeting was for the family. But this letter was only for you. I sat down on the edge of the couch, my eyes fixed on that letter. Why did you wait until now? Because Robert asked me to, Grace said. He said to give it to you when she's ready to hear what I couldn't say while I was alive. How did he know I'd be ready now? Grace smiled softly. He knew you, Emily. Better than anyone. I picked up the letter with hands that trembled for the first time in days. The envelope was light but felt heavy with years of waiting. Whatever my father had written, whatever secrets he'd kept, I was about to finally understand. I opened the envelope carefully. The seal cracked after years of holding. Inside were 3 pages of my father's handwriting, dated 2 months before his death. Grace touched my arm. "Would you read it aloud? I'd like to hear his voice again through you." I nodded and began reading. "My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, then the time has come. I've imagined this moment many times. Wondered what you'd be wearing, whether you'd be crying, whether you'd finally understand why I couldn't tell you these things face to face. Let me start with what matters most. I am so proud of you, not for what you've accomplished, though that pride runs deep, but for who you are. You became extraordinary not because anyone helped you, but because no one did, and I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder for you to be seen." My voice caught on those words. Grace reached over and squeezed my hand. I kept reading. "Your mother loves you. I know it doesn't always feel that way. But her love for Laura was never a replacement for love of you. It was fear. Fear that Laura would break without constant attention. Fear that the damage David Mercer caused would destroy her. Your mother poured everything into Laura because she was terrified of what would happen if she didn't. But you, Emily, you never needed pouring into. You were a well that filled itself. And I watched your mother mistake your strength for indifference to love. I should have corrected her. I didn't. That failure is mine to carry." I had to stop reading. The words blurred on the page. A well that filled itself. My father had seen exactly what I'd become, and he'd understood the cost. "Take your time," Grace said gently. I wiped my eyes and continued. "By now you may have learned about David Mercer, about my partnership with him and what happened after. Here is the truth. David was a con man. I discovered he'd been defrauding our clients, elderly people, families, people who trusted us with their savings. When I found the evidence, I had a choice. Protect my partner, or protect his victims. I chose the victims. I went to the FBI. I testified against him. And yes, I kept the legitimate assets from our partnership. Assets I'd earned honestly, because letting them fall into the hands of David's creditors would have helped no one. David went to prison blaming me for his choices. That's what con men do. They never accept responsibility. If he ever tells you I stole from him, know this. The only thing I took was your mother and Laura, and I took them to safety. I have never regretted that choice, not for one day. Relief flooded through me. My father was exactly who I'd believed him to be. David's accusations were the lies of a convicted criminal, nothing more. "Robert was the most honest man I ever knew," Grace said quietly. "David couldn't stand that." "Dad saved them," I said. "He saved all of us." I turned to the final page of the letter. "Now for the house. By the time you read this, you'll likely know about the debt, about what your mother and Laura did to my life's work. I discovered it 6 months before I died. I was too sick to fix it myself. But I knew you would fix it. I knew you'd find a way to save the house, even if no one asked you to. That's who you are, Emily. You protect things. You save things, even when no one thanks you for it. I asked Grace to watch over you, to be my eyes when I couldn't be there. She tells me you bought the house through an LLC, that you've been paying the mortgage in secret for years, that you never told anyone because you expected no gratitude and wanted no praise. My daughter, my quiet, fierce, magnificent daughter, you did exactly what I hoped you would do. You saved our family's home. And when the time is right, you'll decide what to do with it, not out of revenge, but out of wisdom. I trust you. I've always trusted you." I set the letter down because I couldn't see the words anymore. My eyes had filled with tears I'd been holding back for 38 years. Everything I'd done, every sacrifice I'd made, every time I'd stood in the shadows while others took the spotlight. My father had seen all of it. He'd known. He'd trusted me. I cried then, really cried. Not the quiet, controlled tears I'd learned to hide, deep, shaking sobs that came from somewhere I'd locked away decades ago. All the years of being invisible, being strong, being the one who didn't need anything. It all broke open at once. Grace didn't try to comfort me with words. She just sat beside me, her hand on my back, letting me release what I'd been carrying for so long. When my sobs finally quieted, Grace spoke. "He talked about you constantly those last months, about how proud he was, about how he wished he'd told you more often. Why didn't he? Because he thought you knew. He thought actions spoke louder than words." She paused. "But some words need to be said out loud." I looked at the letter. He finally said them. "Better late than never," Grace said. "That was Robert's way. I'd spent my whole life believing my father saw me. Now I had proof, written proof that he'd watched me become who I am and loved every step of the journey." Grace stood and retrieved something from a drawer. A small velvet box, old and worn. "This wasn't in the instructions," she said. "This is from me. But Robert would have wanted you to have it." I opened the box. Inside was a ring. Simple gold band with a small sapphire. I recognized it immediately. "Your grandmother's ring," Grace said. "Robert's mother wore it for 62 years. When she died, Robert kept it. He always said it would go to the daughter who deserved it." "Laura never got this?" "Laura got a lot of things. But this?" Robert was clear. "This goes to Emily." I slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. The doorbell rang. Grace went to answer it. I heard voices in the hallway. Then footsteps. Then my mother and Laura appeared in the doorway. "Grace, I'm sorry to interrupt," my mother said, "but we saw Emily's car. We wanted—" She trailed off when she saw my face, the tears still drying on my cheeks, the letter in my lap, the ring on my finger. Grace stepped aside. "Come in. It's Christmas. Family should be together." Laura saw everything. The evidence of my breakdown. The letter from a father who had seen me when she thought no one did. The ring I now wore on my hand. For once, she didn't make it about herself. "Is that from Dad?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "What did he say?" I looked at my sister. At this woman who'd taken so much and lost even more. At the fear and uncertainty in her eyes. "He said he loved us," I said. "Both of us. In different ways." Laura's eyes filled with tears. "I never got a letter. He never wrote me anything." The old Emily would have felt satisfaction at this. Proof that I was the favored one, finally. But looking at Laura's face, I didn't feel triumph. I felt something closer to pity. "He didn't write you a letter," I said slowly, "because he said everything to you while he was alive. All those years of attention, of protection, of second chances. That was his letter to you, written in real time." Laura stared at me. Then, for the first time I could remember, my sister said two words I'd never heard from her before. "Thank you." My mother put her arm around Laura. Grace poured more coffee. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering Boston in white. And I sat in that warm living room on Christmas morning, my father's letter in my hands, his mother's ring on my finger, surrounded by a family that was broken but trying. It wasn't the Christmas I'd planned. It wasn't even the Christmas I'd wanted. But it was the Christmas I needed. 6 months after that Christmas, I stood in the garden of my father's house, my house, watching the first roses of summer bloom in soil I'd turned with my own hands. The June sun was warm on my shoulders. Behind me, the house looked different than it had in December. Fresh paint on the shutters, new flowers in the window boxes. The porch my father had rebuilt twice was now home to comfortable chairs and a small table where my mother sat with iced tea watching me work. I knelt in the garden bed, pulling weeds, thinking about how much had changed since that Christmas Eve when everything fell apart and somehow started coming back together. In January, 1 month after the holiday that nearly destroyed us, I'd gathered my mother and Laura at the house for a different kind of meeting. Not a confrontation this time, a conversation about the future. I'd laid out my terms clearly. The house would remain in my name. That was non-negotiable. My mother could continue living there rent-free, but with a formal agreement. Laura was never permitted to use the house as collateral for any loans. I would handle all financial decisions regarding the property. My mother had accepted immediately, gratefully. She'd spent 38 years making decisions that nearly cost us everything. She seemed relieved to hand that burden to someone else. Laura was harder. Her pride was wounded, her ego bruised. But she was also facing bankruptcy and divorce and the complete collapse of the life she'd built on credit cards and lies. She didn't have the luxury of arguing. Diana Walsh drew up a simple lease. My mother as tenant, me as landlord, no rent but clear boundaries. It wasn't about control. It was about protecting what my father built and making sure no one could destroy it again. The house that almost divided us became the structure that held us together. Not because I gave it away, but because I held on to it with clear terms and open hands. Laura's life in those 6 months had been a slow, painful reckoning. Nathan's divorce was finalized in March. He got the apartment, she got the debt. Over $120,000 of it, between the credit cards, the forged loans, and the money she'd sent to David Mercer. David had disappeared after Christmas Eve, took what Laura had given him, and vanished like the con man he'd always been. She'd tried calling him for weeks. He never answered. By February, his phone was disconnected. He got what he wanted, Laura had told me one afternoon, her voice flat with the recognition of her own foolishness. I think I always knew he would. She'd filed for bankruptcy in April, moved back into her childhood bedroom at the family house. Started therapy, first because the bankruptcy court required financial counseling, then because she realized she needed more than that. In May, she'd gotten a job as an administrative assistant at a small insurance company, entry-level, minimum wage. A humbling step down from the lifestyle she'd pretended to afford for years. But she showed up every day, did the work, didn't complain. She'd started paying me $50 a month toward the debt she owed. Not the money she'd drained from the house. That was too vast to ever repay, but a symbolic amount. A gesture. I know $50 doesn't fix anything, she'd said when she handed me the first payment. But I wanted you to know I'm trying. I didn't forgive Laura. Not completely. I wasn't sure I ever would. But I stopped waiting for her to become someone she'd never been. I accepted who she was becoming instead. For the first time in her life, my sister was building something rather than taking something. That was enough for now. My mother's transformation had been the most surprising of all. She'd sold her expensive car and bought a used Honda. Started volunteering at the library twice a week, joined a support group for parents of adult children with financial problems, and learned she wasn't alone in her mistakes. She called me every Sunday now, not to report on Laura or ask for favors, just to talk, to ask about my work, my life, my garden, to listen when I answered. In April, she'd sent me a card. Not for my birthday, not for a holiday, just because. The card said, "I'm proud of the woman you are. I'm sorry I didn't say it sooner. Love, Mom." I'd kept it on my refrigerator for a month. My mother at 65 was finally becoming the parent she should have been at 35. Late, but not too late. My own life had transformed too. I'd taken a month off work in February, my first real vacation in years. I didn't travel anywhere exotic. I stayed home, read books, slept late, learned that resting wasn't the same as being lazy. I'd started seeing a therapist in March, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to process everything that had happened. To understand why I'd spent so long being invisible. To learn how to take up space without apologizing for it. "You've spent your whole life being strong for everyone else," my therapist had said during one session. It's okay to be strong for yourself, too. I'd been promoted in April, senior partner at my firm. When I called my mother to tell her, she'd cried, happy tears, and I'd started dating someone. His name was James, a history professor at Boston University. Kind eyes, gentle laugh. We'd met at a bookstore in March, both reaching for the same biography of Eleanor Roosevelt. It was early still, but it was good. He asked about my day and actually listened to the answer. I'd spent 38 years believing I had to choose between having a family and having myself. Turns out I could have both. I just had to build the family I deserved, not accept the one I was given. I stood up from the garden bed and brushed the dirt from my knees. Inside the house, I could hear voices, laughter, the sound of family. Today was a gathering, not a formal event. Just people who mattered, sharing a summer afternoon. Aunt Grace was holding court in the living room, telling stories about my father that made everyone laugh. Diana Walsh was there too, no longer just my attorney but a genuine friend. James had come, meeting my family for the first time, nervous but trying. Even Laura was there, quiet but present, helping set the table without being asked. And my mother, sitting on the porch, watching me garden with an expression I'd never seen before. Pride. Real pride. The kind she used to reserve only for Laura. This was what healing looked like. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of something stronger. Not forgetting the past, but refusing to let it dictate the future. I walked back toward the porch, pausing by the rose bushes I'd planted in April. They were blooming now, red and pink and white. My father would have loved them. I touched my grandmother's ring, still on my finger where it belonged. I thought about my father's letter, the words I'd memorized by now. My quiet, fierce, magnificent daughter. Standing up for yourself isn't cruel, it's necessary. Love doesn't require you to accept mistreatment. Protecting what's yours, your boundaries, your dignity, your property, isn't selfishness. It's survival. I could have accepted being pushed aside. Many would have. But I chose differently. I sat down next to my mother on the porch. She reached over and squeezed my hand. "Merry belated Christmas," she said softly. I laughed. "It's June, Mom." "I know, but I never said it properly back in December. So, Merry Christmas, Emily. Thank you for not giving up on us." I squeezed her hand back. "Merry Christmas, Mom." The sun was setting over Boston, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. In the garden, my father's roses bloomed. Inside the house, my family laughed together. And for the first time in 38 years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. So here's what I learned, and what I hope you'll carry with you. You teach people how to treat you. Every time you accept less than you deserve, you're giving them permission to keep giving you less. And every time you stand up, even when it's terrifying, even when it means standing alone, you're telling the world that you matter. Your boundaries matter. Your dignity matters. If you're listening to this from a family that doesn't see you, I want you to know something. Your worth isn't determined by their attention. You are not invisible. You are not less than. You are exactly enough. So here's my question for you. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family? What did you learn? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if this story gave you something, courage, hope, or just the reminder that you're not alone, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and remember, you deserve respect. Never forget that. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for staying until the end. Now go write your own. This story is fictionalized for dramatic effect.